Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening again. It's great to see everyone here. Thanks for being here for our night 3 of our Lenten speaker series. So we've had a beautiful journey so far through different lives of the saints. Oh, good, we have Kevin Wells here with us. He's incoming injured. That's how much he's willing to sacrifice to be here with us today. But we're grateful that he's here with us. Kevin Wells was a former writer, Major League Baseball writer, and he has used his gifts to evangelize now, spread the good news of the Lord in our church by promoting the priesthood, beautiful way of living priesthood, and also promoting the cause of Venerable Father Aloysius Schwartz. So he'll share more of his work with that cause and everything as he shares his story. But we're really grateful that Kevin has chosen to be with us this evening. And I'm really grateful that you're here, Kevin. You've been injured. Thank you so much. And so let's welcome Kevin. Thank you.
We have a round of applause for Father Matt for putting this on. Father Matt, you're giving the church exactly what it needs now, is you're raising up the saints, you're holding up the saints, and that's what our world needs now, is they need to see the holy witness of the saints. So thank you for doing this. And also, I guess just as importantly, if not more, exposing the Blessed Sacrament thereafter, and having confessions too. I mean, this is like bar. This is the good Catholic stuff tonight. So this is what we need. So thank you, Father. Oh, it's not working? It's not on? Okay. How about now, guys? Still no? I can go louder. Are you sure? How about in the back? Danny, can you hear me in the back? You got me? Oh, Father, okay, very good. I'll talk a little bit louder until Father turns it up. So tonight we're going to talk about Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. Let's be honest, no embarrassment here. Who's ever heard of him? Oh, actually, a lot more than what I thought. All right, Steve's heard of him. Debbie, how are you? So what I'd like to do tonight, I often think that stories sometimes are best told at the very end and the beginning. So I want to uncork this story at the end. So I'd written a book a few years ago called The Priest We Need to Save the Church, and a married couple, Tom and Glory Sullivan, came up to me and they said, we know who the priest we need to save the church is, and his name is Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. And I said, I really don't know the guy. I know him a little bit, but not much. So they shoved some books in my hand. They said, read his life. So I did, and I said, my goodness. I had spent months researching the priest titans. John Vianney, Newman, Bosco, Pio, Damien the Leper, John Paul. And what I had read about this Venerable Aloysius Schwartz, I had never read before. What he had accomplished was incomprehensible outside the finger of God. So I called up my favorite Catholic publisher, Ignatius, and I said, you got to write this, you got to publish this guy's biography. I don't know who he is. Well, here's who he is. And once they learned who this guy was, they said, write his book. So what do you do? What's an old sports writer do during the middle of COVID? Actually, the beginning of COVID. You go down to Mexico, where the Sisters of Mary, the order he founded, take care of 3,300 bullied girls. I had heard that there were some sisters there that took care of Father Al as he was dying of ALS in 1992. So the old reporter says, get down there. So that's what I did. So this was back in the glory days of COVID when they stuck Q-tips up your nose that were made out of logs that are about this long. And you had 16 masks and all that. But somehow I got down there. And I had as much time as I wanted to explore this paragon. So I got off the bus, went into this humble kingdom of resurrection that to me seemed like heaven. I can't properly describe it. We don't have time tonight, but it's like heaven because you have Lazaruses that came in dead and they're raised to life, and the joy they exude is not painted on, it is real. So I went up to Sister Margie. She's kind of the Mother Superior that night, and I said, Sister, let's get going. She said, Kevin, I know why you're here. You want to start interviewing sisters and figuring about Father Al. So let's start tomorrow at 9 a.m. I said, Sister, I'm on it. So the next day I showed up at 9 a.m. and there was 12 girls, white shirts, blue blouses, blue skirts, smiling. And I said, all right, Sister Margie said, talk to them and then you'll begin to take the pilgrimage to learn who this Father Al was. So I began to talk to them, and all of a sudden I saw that they weren't really 12 happy girls. They seemed to me to be 12 broken apostles. Zyra, the first child I met, came up to me and said that she was once chased an hour up a mountain by a human trafficker, her village by the sea being full of such monsters. Her grandfather, with whom she lived, was drunk most nights. She said I would kneel in front of the statue of Mary and pray that the fights and the drinking would stop. And then the second girl, Antonina, she's been an orphan since her father was shot dead in the street. Her mom, she believes, burned to death. These stories, there are thousands, are why the Sisters of Mary welcome the children each morning as mothers do sons returning from war. These are saving grounds, fields of goodwill and rebirth. And it took me a while to figure out why the teenagers addressed each of the sisters as madre, not hermana. But these faithful women educate, nourish, counsel, catechize, jog with, play sports with, and pray with the students. They never stop. A sister told me, we are spiritual mothers to them first. They have been through far too much. The slow, tender eloquence of the maternal love pulls away layer after layer after layer of wounds and horrors too graphic for this writing, to give Christ to these children. It is grueling work, but they know the secret of the saints. Persevering love stir hearts to healing. After the last girl was done, 3 hours later, my interpreter is crying. A sister of Mary. I said, why are you crying? I knew it was bad, Kevin, but I didn't know the stories were this intense. I said, how do you find them? How do you get them? Listen to what these Sisters of Mary do. Father Al founded this order in post-war Korea in 1964. All these years later, 2021, 2022, all over the world in 7 different countries. We'll just stick with Mexico. The Sisters of Mary, there's 402 worldwide today. The 3 most dangerous towns of Mexico where human trafficking, where monsters live, where these hills, these mountains are bathed in monsters. Guerrero, Oaxaca, Veracruz. The sisters go to the worst places, and 2 by 2, they climb these mountains, these tree-lined mountains. That's where the human traffickers go, because that's where they can hide and get away. 2 by 2, they slither up these mountains, and they walk by human traffickers, MS-13, murderers, drug dealers. Sisters walk right by them, and finally they get to that village, way up on the top of the hill. And they listen. It's almost like they walk into the most vulnerable hut, the most vulnerable shack, and it's like they're listening to the inside, the knocking of the inside of a tomb. And the sisters lift the tomb up, lift the lid up, and they see a child down there, 12, 13 years old. It's time to come down this mountain. Sister, I can't. It's time. We're here for you now. The sisters are known for their smiles. Sister, I can't come out. If I come out, they'll kill me and they'll kill you. No. No, we've come to rescue you and bring you down. Your mother said she's been praying for us to come up this mountain. Well, now we're here. Sister, can I? Yes. They take this poor child down this mountain. They walk past MS-13, the murderers, the traffickers, the worst of the worst, the monsters, and they bring them into these humble kingdoms of resurrection. And once they come in, they say, you've suffered too much. Give me your blue whale-sized cross. We must die now, and you must live. And for 5 years, these kids become Lazarus raised from the grave. And it's the greatest, I believe, as someone who knows the story now, I believe it's one of the greatest things we got going in the Catholic Church now, and I'll explain at the end of this talk why it is. What they do and what they are doing right now for this world is startling, and we'll get to it later. So, of course, they're raising up these Lazaruses. They're forming the Catholic soul. They're giving these kids life. They're breathing life into these kids. But how does this start? How does this start? It doesn't start with Al Schwartz. It starts in a tiny little town called Banot, Belgium in 1933 with this little girl, little 13-year-old girl, a little peasant named Mariette Becco from a family of 12. Her family had dropped the Catholic faith. World War I devastated this town of 250 people. So they heard the Angelus bells, but nobody knelt down to pray. On Sunday, they heard the chiming of the bell, but nobody went to Mass. World War I stole the Catholic faith in this village. Then one day, Mariette Becco, this 13-year-old girl, she pressed her nose up against the frozen window pane of her house, and she smiled, and she said, this woman's smiling. It's Mary. And then four apparitions later, there was 8 apparitions. On the 4th one, Mary coaxed Mariette out of this house. It was a January night, frigid out. And Mary said something very strange to Mariette, almost cruel, very cruel, to this poor girl who just knew poverty. Mary said, Mariette, I am the Virgin of the poor. I have come for the humiliated. Take your hands and plunge them into the water. Mariette had never seen this spring before. But Mariette obliged as the Mother of God, and she placed her hands in the water. Very cruel, right? Not to Father Al. Not to Father Al. And we'll get to that in a few minutes, because what happened, Father Al was 3 years old. On that night when Mary told asked Mariette to put her hands in the water, Father Al was 3 years old. He had grown up in a terrible part of Washington, D.C. As the crow flies, it's about 30 miles away from here. He grew up in the teeth of the Great Depression. You could not have been born at a worse time. His father had a 6th grade education, trying to raise a family on a 6th grade education with a lousy job. Hitler's on the rise. The dust storms kick up. 15 million people lost their jobs. These Hoovervilles were all over D.C. And Father Al, as a 9-year-old boy, said, it seems like God's face has turned away. I wonder if a priest can go to families like my own and to warm them and to bring them the love of Christ. I wonder if priests can go to the poorest of the poor. And the pilot light blinked on. So I wanted to be a baseball player when I got old. And I realized in high school my talent level would not sustain my dream to be a baseball player. Father Al wanted to be a holy priest that went to the poorest of the poor, and it just grew. He ended up with the Maryknollers. He was the only kid in town that got a full ride to Gonzaga High School in D.C. He said, I don't want it. Mom, Dad, I don't want it. I want to go to seminary. So he ended up at St. Charles in Baltimore, minor seminary, ended up with the Maryknollers. And this will tell you, we're going to get to the crux of the matter. This will tell you of the startling, bold priest that this man ended up becoming. As a seminarian, he was with the Maryknollers. At that time, the Maryknollers were the king of the hill. They traveled to Africa, Taiwan, Cambodia. They were the guys that went to the poor. Father Al said, I don't want you. Why, Al? You're doing well in classes. You seem to be one of our guys. I don't want you. Because when the sun sets and the moon begins to rise, your Maryknollers throughout the world go back to the rectory. And there's 3 squares. And they often have televisions, and they often have radios. And they have comfortable bedding, and there's furniture, and some have AC and heat. I don't want you. If I'm going to be Jesus Christ, the starved man on the cross, then I must know the humiliations that Christ felt. Because if I don't step over the periphery of poverty and enter into the poor will never trust me. So God bless you. I want to go. He found the Psalmists in Belgium. Bingo. The Psalmists wanted to be poor men priests in the poorest villages, in the poorest parts of the world. And he said, that's what I want. Everyone in his family, every friend, said, dumbest mistake you ever made. What does a bold man do? I don't care. Mary is calling me. So I go. Got on a boat in 1953. Was 3 months behind in the course load, did not speak French, did not speak Latin other than the Mass, but that's all they spoke in the classrooms. By the end of the semester, he was passing his classmates by. Where initially they saw this American as a renegade, as a cowboy, as cocky, they said, my goodness, this guy has something in him that we don't. This guy is uncommon. The only American, you got Frenchmen, you got Englishmen, you got Belgians, you got Germans, and one American named Al. And then he heard about Beno. And he said, Mary, I am now your slave, like Louis de Montfort. I will give every day the rest of my life to you. Because when you told Mariette to stick her hands in that pond, in that brook, you were saying, I want you to understand the humiliations of Jesus Christ on the cross. And if I'm going to be a priest one day, and if I don't suffer as Jesus did, if I don't feel the humiliations, the starvation, the suffocation from the cross, the bleeding out as a priest, then Mary, I'm really no good to your son or you. So Mary, I will not take a day off. 1957, he raised his hand right after becoming a priest, and he said, what's the worst place in the world? And his rector said, what are you talking about? I want the worst. The war just ended in Korea. Do they need priests in Korea? Yeah, they do. Let's go to Korea. On the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 1957, he got off a train and he looked into a dystopian novel. It was a scorched landscape. Lepers were in the streets rubbing their diseased limbs off of people to steal their money. Unwed mothers were living under bridges, impregnated by American servicemen, cast-offs of society. Orphans, those orphans, laying all over the streets like leftover war shrapnel. To tubercular, living up on these mountains. The southern peninsula of Korea is very mountainous. Living up on these mountains, left to die. Thousands of them. TB was big back then. Just left to die. You'd walk by this mountain and you just heard a cacophony of coughs. That first day, he wrote in his journals, he breathed in the human waste, the dead animals, the stench, the pollution, the rot. And he said, thank you, Mary. I asked for poverty and it embraces me fiercely. Thank you, Mary. Let's get to work. Thank God there was a man named Damiano Park who became a lifelong friend. Damiano was in college and he spoke English. A Korean who spoke English. Father Al heard about him. He said, now you are my wingman. Let's go up the mountain. Father, nobody goes up that mountain. Let's go up the mountain. One day the pair left the rectory at daybreak, Damiano and Father Al, and they walked the long bridge that stretched from Busan onto Yeongdo, an island notorious for its several thousands of terraced shacks built onto a mountainside. The huts were almost indistinguishable from the mud-brown mountain on which they were located. To Father Al, this bridge acted as a metaphor. It struck him that setting foot on the island of Yeongdo represented the first day of the remainder of his life. This was his turning to Jerusalem. It was where he could finally enter to bear the cross of the societally leprous and offer his priesthood as a crucifixion to unite himself with them. he stopped on the span of the bridge, he lingered a bit, and he began to pray. Damiano said, he quoted, Father Al was leaning against the guardrail of the bridge and attentively looking at the shabbily clothed people walking over the bridge with their stooped bodies against the cold weather sea and the wind blowing against their rough faces. Father Al looked very serious. He seemed to become resolved that he would proclaim the good news of salvation to him. So as they ascended the winding path of the tiny homes of the cliff dwellers on that mountain, the pair was forced to step over thin streams of grayish water that flowed toward the bay like thin, steaming oatmeal. They eventually walked into a community of thousands of mountainside hovels, perched on inconceivably sloping angles, many of which were held up by bamboo stilts that defied the laws of physics. As the priest and his friend entered the homes of the cliff dwellers, one by one, he discovered a solemn and anxious population strangled by appalling conditions, tuberculosis, scarcity of food, despair, faithlessness, and various illnesses brought on by Korea's merciless winter winds. All over the mountainside was the echo of people coughing. The first tent into which he crawled was filled with 4 men afflicted with tuberculosis. The gusts of clean air from the Sea of Japan instantly became overwhelmed by the smell of disease, putrefied garbage, sweat, and human waste. The American priest inhaled, yes, Mary, this is the smell of home. 16 years after movements in his boyhood heart began to point him toward the friendless life of a missionary, Father Al could finally articulate in action what had perhaps began to ripple in him as a child at yellow-bricked Holy Name Elementary in Washington, D.C., 7,100 miles away. Oh, Jesus, allow me now to enter well into the sweet violence of this poverty. In his soul, the path of the mountains seemed like a red carpet, crowning his marriage to innumerable days of dry martyrdom. His home now was in the midst of lonesome, unmarked places, in garbage dump homes, cruel government-run tubercular wards, and shanties outside his rectory where the insane lived. Here, Father Al could effectively crawl into the skin of Jesus Christ, the starved man. Within 15 years of crawling into those mountainside shacks, all of South Korea was changed. This man, this 37-year-old man with no business acumen, no background, built and was running a 7-story high hospital. Doctors, nurses, I got your salaries. Patients, you go free. You need an elementary school in the slums? Let me build a giant 6-story building. Students and teachers, I got you. He built 8 or 9 hospices. He built a tubercularium, leprosarium. All of South Korea changed because Father Al said, I must die so they can live. If you were unwanted, if you were humiliated, if you were hated, if you were diseased, if you were despised, you were on Father Al's team. How could he do this in 15 years? How could he do this? Again, this man was bold. Here's what bold people do. Jesus, I don't know. It's 1957. There's too many. What do I do? Al, amputate every measure of your comfort. Annihilate everything you brought over from America that has made you comfortable. Okay? He moved into a shack on a mountainside. People mistook it for an outhouse. No electricity, no plumbing, no running water, nothing. And for 5 years, in this shack, he absorbed the saints, the desert fathers, the hermits, St. Anthony of the Desert, and he was sacramentalized by his poverty. When he came out, he was a shaft of light to the poor. He was like a tipped-over chalice of our Lord's most precious blood that spilled out all over the streets of South Korea. But it couldn't just be him. So he picked 12 poor women. He knew if he had 12 poor women, that the poor that he was serving would respect them. And Father Al was also very smart. He was practical. He was funny. He said, yeah, these 12 women you just hired, we got a few Buddhists, we got a couple Muslims, a few agnostics, 1 or 2 Catholics. They're all going to be nuns. They're all nuns. They don't know it. Within a year, the Sisters of Mary began, and all 12 of those sisters became Sisters of Mary. And these Sisters of Mary were like bright hallelujahs of hope that went into the streets and looked for the poorest of the poor. Father Al finally got his name for what he's known for now. He started to build boys' towns and girls' towns. Today, 21,000 children throughout the world today, March 22nd, 2022, had bowls of cornflakes poured for them. Dinner tonight. They prayed a rosary today, every night at 7 o'clock. They went to daily mass. The bullied kids in the world, 21,000, are being taken care of today. What happens when you change all of South Korea? Well, the cat's out of the bag. The cardinal for the Philippines said, you've been nominated twice for the Nobel Peace Prize. You just won the Magsaysay Award. Korea is no longer poor. Come to us. So Father Al climbed a mountain called Smoky Mountain, where 20,000 people lived in debris and filth. Every day, all day long, trucks back up, beep, 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 the trash onto this mountain. Father Al was climbing this mountain with cardinal sin, and he began to cry because he saw these children caked in sweat and dirt, buck naked. Parents would say, go to the trash pile, the fresh trash pile. You'd go up to this mountain, and there was this ethereal haze 24/7 that would it smelled like the seventh ring of hell. And Father Al saw these boys and girls jump in, and he saw Jesus Christ because they risked puncturing their hands on shards of glass and rusted nails. Same thing with their feet. He said, these are Jesus Christ, and I will bring them down. These kids who have never kicked a soccer ball will become professional athletes. These kids who have never turned the page of a book, they will become educators. These kids who have never flushed a toilet will become the Philippines' future plumbers. There are priests up here. There are nuns up here. There are engineers. There are lawyers. There are architects. I will bring them down. Within 10 years, there's 12,000 children at 4 different boys' towns and girls' towns in the Philippines. How does this happen? Because he became a slave to Mary. What happens when you do this type of work? You get attacked everywhere you go. A mafia kingpin continuously tried to murder him because of the money they had raised from Americans. His own bishop in Korea tried to get him thrown out of the country. Get this, American bishops, not all of them, but a good handful of bishops, wrote the Pope at the time and said, tell this American renegade priest in Korea to stop taking our money. Father Al got a cease and desist order from the Vatican. Hey, Father Al, please stop asking Americans for donations for the Koreans, for the Filipinos. Father Al's like, what? 3 months later, another more strongly worded letter came. Cease and desist, Father. The bishops have asked you. So what does a bold priest who's a slave of Mary do? I will get on a plane and I will go to the Pope. And he won that fight. You cannot lose a fight when you become consecrated to Mary. The Pope said, thank you for ignoring my letter because it showed me that you have a heart for the poor. Onward, go. Keep feeding the poor. Only one thing could slow Father Al down. ALS in 1989. Michael Jordan is playing basketball for the Bulls. This guy is a saint for our times. What happens when you get ALS? What happens when I get ALS? If I get it one day, knock on wood, I slow down. I take my foot off the accelerator. I'm like, I'm done. Not Father Al. Father Al, hey, Mary, what do you think? Well, I'm losing my Juan Diegos. Poverty is crushing my Catholics. They're leaving the faith. They're becoming evangelicals, atheists, agnostics. They're losing them out. Mary, I don't have much in the tank. My voice doesn't really work anymore. I use a cane. My clothes don't fit. But Mary, if you call, then I go. So he took about 3 sisters. And he flies off to Mexico. And he knew he was going to disappear there. He knew he was going to die there. He knew he was going to wither and fade away. All Father Al wanted was one thing his whole life. He wrote about this very beautifully in seminary. Jesus, I want to be nailed on the other side of the cross. I want to be the star on the cross. I want to know what it felt like. Father Al got his wish. 1990, 1991, 1992, he was nailed to the cross of his wheelchair. Jesus Christ suffocated on the cross. ALS patients, many of them ended up suffocating and dying. Father Al had no dignity. He couldn't clean himself. Jesus Christ had no dignity on the cross. Jesus was lonely on the cross. Everybody save beloved John and Mary left him. Father Al was lonely. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He couldn't do anything. And what does Father Al say on his deathbed? Jesus, thank you. I asked for the poverty of the cross, and now it embraces me fiercely. Jesus, thank you. He is a saint for these times. I'll speak frankly now. I'll speak very frankly now. I think one of the reasons our church and our society is suffering is because we've lost the value of sacrifice. Since when did sacrifice stop mattering? Why have we stopped calling the Mass the holy sacrifice of the Mass? Sure, it's a celebration. What goes on the altar, what Father Matt did an hour ago, that's not soft. It's a sacrifice. Father Al got this. Father Al became a martyr for Mary, and he saved countless thousands of souls. 170,000 kids have gone through these boys' towns and girls' towns and have ended up running businesses, becoming professional athletes, playing in front of Carnegie Hall, thousands, orchestral musicians, lawyers, doctors, nuns, priests, because one priest said, Mary, I will die to be like your son. Where has sacrifice gone in my life? Why do we no longer hear about sacrifice? He's a saint for these times because he died every single stinking day of his life because he told Mary, that's what I'm going to do to be like your son. I'll end on this. Line up 200 priests in a row in 2018, and you say, in D.C., say, who's the hardest working priest in D.C.? 200 out of 200 say Father Dan Leary. Father Dan Leary knocks on the door of bishops years ago and says, I want to work harder. I want to become a missionary. I know I'm going to get kicked in the teeth. I know it will work, but I want to try and step in the shoes of this giant. What? Yeah, I want to become a chaplain to these kids. I want to go to the poorest of the poor. Talked to him this morning. Right now he's in Tanzania, Africa. He spent the last 2 years in Mexico, Brazil, Honduras, Guatemala, with the most bullied kids in the world. Unspeakable things happen to these girls, and the worst way that a girl can be hurt, well, that's what happens. Father Dan, day after day after day, is in the box, the confessional, 4 to 6 hours a day, but that's the easy part. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting into the wound of when the drunk uncle, the stepfather who's just a demon, the touchy-feely cousin does the unspeakable to a young girl, or a boy gets beaten with a crowbar because he didn't enter MS-13. Father Dan needs to get into the wound, hold it up, and say, this is the day it happened. You want to walk away from it. Father Dan told me today, he woke up at 4:30, getting ready for his first holy hour with the sisters, and he hears the call for prayer, the Muslim call for prayer. There's a man about a half mile away up on a building. Father Dan's walking with the sisters into the heat to begin the first holy hour. He knows many of the girls that these sisters will encounter and that he'll encounter that day have escaped genital mutilation. These sisters, these remarkable sisters, one story, just one story. Last year, two sisters, remember the sisters always go 2 by 2, Tanzania. They hopped on a bus, two sisters in Dar es Salaam, and they traveled 22 hours in a bus. They finally got to the water. And then they took a 5-hour trip in the water on a small boat to a tiny island called Ukraine Island in Africa. But then they had to get on another boat for a 4-hour trip to get to a tiny little island. Look this up. Ukana Island, U-K-A-N-A, Ukana Island, U-K-A-N-A, in the middle of nowhere. These two sisters finally get there 30 hours later. And on this water, it's very windy and it's choppy. They're risking their own lives. And they got to this island where there's no electricity, no running water, nothing. Poverty embraces them, and they found the one girl. We hear you want an education. Yes, sisters. Let's go. One girl gets on the boat 4 hours. Another trip, 5 hours. 22 hours. Back to Girlstown, where Father Dan Leary is today. And this is why it's the best story in the world today. And I'm prejudiced. I'm going to tell you I'm prejudiced. But here's why it's uncommon. Let's say that. Here's why it's uncommon. Because these kids, these Lazaruses that have been pulled from the tomb, they're going off after 5 years of schooling into colleges, workplaces, even back into their old villages up on the hills. And they're saying, don't tell me that my Catholic religion is passé. Don't tell me, roommate, that this rosary is a Catholic heirloom, that shove it away in a closet. And don't tell me about this new form of marriage that you're telling me is right. Or gender. Don't tell me any of this, because I was a dead person, and these sisters raised me to life, and I live again. This Catholic faith of mine, what was built into me, it is unshakable in my soul, and it will not go. And what happens? Over and over and over again, what happens? And I hear it because I've interviewed them, the kids and the sisters. 3-4 months later is the knock on the door from the boss, the roommate, the skeptical kid. Hey, I've been watching you. You threw me off with what you said, and I didn't trust you, and I thought you were judgmental, but I've been watching you, and I see your eyes, and there's something in them that I don't have. And you talked about your faith. Can you teach me what I once knew? Or can you teach me what I've never known? I want to know what you know. These children, in my estimation, not the Pope, not bishops, not cardinals, not me, not Catholic writers, YouTube videos, Matthew Kelly, whatever. These kids are the greatest Catholic missionaries in the world, because every year between 4,000 and 6,000 graduate, and they go out into the world as shafts of Catholic light. They step into the world like Father Al, one of the boldest saints in the history of our church, and they say, look into my eyes. Just like Father Al up in those mountains in Korea, look into my eyes. I will take you down. You must know God's dignity. I don't care that you're dying of TB. I don't care that I might get TB. I'm going to take you down and put you in a hospital because you need to know God. These kids, all these years later, 2022, are going into the world. So up on the mountain in Korea, they were sick up there, but you know what, guys? You know what, guys? The world today, I think we all know it, it's sin sick because it does not know Jesus Christ. These kids say, I will help you become well. When the Virgin of the Poor in 1933 said, Mariette, I am the Virgin of the Poor. I have come to bring relief to the suffering. Guess what's happening today? These kids, it's almost like Mary was talking to these kids in 1933. They are the ones bringing relief to the suffering. They're the ones going into a pagan, fire-breathing dragon world saying, I am Catholic and it has saved my life. Come. Let me tell you what I know. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Sorry about the low tech. I'll let you guys have to go back to your confirmation students. But we'll take a few minutes if anybody else gathered here has any questions for Kevin. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hands. All right. Oh, go for it. Yeah. I'll tell you one way before he talks. We have 2 baskets in the back, right on top of our typical collection bins, where you can financially give to the organization. I'm always nervous I'm going to say it wrong. World Villages for Children. I was going to say for Mary, but equal. World Villages for Children. So the organization, please, it's a beautiful organization that Kevin works for, and that's what has been built from in the mission of Father Al. So financially supporting is one way to give. And again, there's baskets back there tonight if you'd like to do that. But Kevin, do you have any?
Am I on here? Oh, very good. Thank you for that, Father. One other thing is I'll say in the back you can sponsor a sister. So each sister has between 30 and 45 kids. So what happens is, $2, shoot. So I sponsor a sister. I think I pay $100 a month. So I support these kids that these sisters take care of. And what happens is you become spiritually adopted. They know who you are, and they begin to pray for you. So not only are you helping them, but they're helping you. They'll write you letters. You begin to understand the mission. So I got some siblings back there. We got Chrissy. Well, Mike popped in late. Figures. So we got Danny. So my uncle Tom Wells told me one time. He said I asked him about tithing and how do you do this? This is way out of college. He said, just give to 3. Give to 3 consistently. And when I found out about this group 2 years ago, I changed my tithe. This group's on the top of my tithe, and I think I explained why. Because I believe, from what I've learned, I've spent a long time down there researching this outfit and Father Al and the sisters and what they do, and I've seen it. I do believe they're helping to resurrect the battered part of our Catholic Church. So obviously we know that the corporal works of mercy are beautiful, they're important. But these sisters know that the spiritual works of mercy are more vital, they're essential. So every day they pray 3 hours a day because they know they can't do the work. It's grinding work unless they first pray. So I would encourage you to sponsor a sister. We have literature back there, or go on to worldvillages.org. That's worldvillages.org, and you can learn all about the mission. But yeah, 21,000 kids is a lot. So they could really use your help, your financial help, and your prayers. Hey, Steve.
Kevin, I couldn't help but notice you had a book there. And is that book available? And do you have it here? Or how do one get that book?
Good question.
Thank you, Steve. You're always picking up my slack. The book is in the back, actually. If anyone would like to purchase the novel, the biography I wrote last year, Priest and Beggar, I didn't tell you a whole lot about, I imagine the other speakers that you've had this week spoke more about the saint. I didn't speak an awful lot about him because I want you to understand the magnitude of this man's life. It's a story of a startling man who became a startling priest. And it's a priest for these times. So if you're interested in purchasing the book, there's books in the back.
One other thing.
Yeah.
If you don't know the number, I do. Just talk about the economics of it all. We get 21,000 kids approximately. What does it cost to feed, house, educate, and care for the spiritual welfare of each child per year?
Steve, why don't you answer that question?
I think it's $1,300.
So $1,300 a year for one child of 21,000 children throughout the world. So we need our benefactors.
To
Feed them,
house them,
educate,
care for their spiritual welfare, and their care for their health.
and their health. So
$1,300 a year, so they operate economically.
yeah, so Steve just said it. Steve and Debbie are very active in the organization, very active. They're some of the best benefactors in America to the Sisters of Mary. So you have 1,300 girls for 5 years. I'm sorry, $1,300 for 5 years for one individual. And, you know, it's if it wasn't worthy, I wouldn't be asking for help, but it's worthy. Yes, Becky. Yeah, Becky, that's a great question. His cause for canonization, he's venerable, has been taken up by the Philippines, Manila, Philippines. But D.C., they haven't embraced him fully. I don't think. You know, they've obviously recognized him over the years, especially when he became venerable in 2015, when Pope Francis named him venerable. There was a big mass that Cardinal Wuerl celebrated, and but yeah, you know, I've often thought. So I've been to his childhood home, I've been to his school, I've been to his church, and Becky, you're looking for something to do? No, we need. You know what? We actually we don't have that advocate. The organization World Villages for Children. We tried to get his name and the mission out there, but as far as from the diocese, from the chancery, we really do not have that advocate. We feel like Father Dan, in a certain way, is doing his best as a D.C. priest to get him out there, but nobody here in D.C. No, I think the answer is fair to say no.
Part of the significance of people being recognized as saints is the increase in public veneration, right? So that's part of the reason why we invited Kevin. We're inviting people also to represent people who aren't necessarily canonized saints yet, because it's equally as important to spread the cause among the faithful as well, to increase awareness and attentiveness and for public veneration. Yeah.
Yeah, so Becky, so I've often thought that, so Father Al died way too soon. He should still be alive. He would be 91 years old. I've often thought if he didn't die, that you might have boys' towns and girls' towns in the hollers of West Virginia, in downtown Chicago. But tragically, you know, he died early. So to build these boys' towns and girls' towns, these are 7-story high buildings that house literally thousands of children. So it costs a lot of money to keep this going. So that's why the sisters need benefactors. So yeah, it's tough. I think the sisters would love to go to some of the poorest cities in America, but we know there's a heavy cost. I'm with you though. Yes.
I know you won't mind me doing this. I want to put in a plug for you. Please pray for Father Dan. I was blessed to be in his first parish when he was newly ordained priest. And we witnessed an amazing priest and continue to watch him grow. And if there's anyone that could step in these shoes, I remember you once said, anyone crazy enough to think they could step into these shoes. But
thank you. I was tired of talking to him, so I said I didn't want to do it again. But no, Father Dan, really, generally, he's too busy. So he felt that first Lent, he wanted to get his work known, but, he's in Tanzania. He can't, so oh, yeah. So it's called the One-to-One Podcast, and I think we did, I don't even remember, 15 different podcasts. So if you just plug in one-to-one on, I guess, YouTube or Spotify, you'll find it. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. He really does get into the grind of the work that he does with these kids. And really, he tells the story of Father Al and the sisters. There are really some gripping stories of what he opens up in those podcasts. Thank you.
And Father Dan is in this picture, if you don't know who Father Dan is. He's in that picture.
So
right there.
I'll tell you this really quick about Father Dan. He told me, so last month, Bishop Joseph Coffey was down there with and another priest, Father Sean Fogo. And one night, and this is actually fairly common. So there was about 800 girls in a room, and without going too much into it, Father Dan will expose the monstrance, and he has these sheets. And on these sheets, he has like 20 items: lust, anger, theft, sexual impurity, and you just check the boxes. And then you lay them at the base of the monstrance, and you ask Jesus to take them away, and that's where the holy hour starts. But oftentimes what happens is when he exposes the Blessed Sacrament, girls, because they've been so tortured by demons, drunk stepfathers, touchy-feely uncles from the age of 7 and 8, and I hate to say it, guys, I know we have some tender ears in here, but this is the recurring problem. People think of poverty as, threadbare clothing, shacks, no food, but poverty is so much worse. It's deeper, it's sinister. Once Satan gets into the alcohol, the family dysfunction, the broken families, then the demonic takes place to these girls. So Father Dan will expose the Blessed Sacrament, and on this one night that Bishop Coffey and Father Shaw was down there, 2 girls fell to the ground and they started writhing and screaming at the Eucharist. They were oppressed. So the work is not only tireless work where he's losing weight and all that, big deal. I'm not here to blow sunshine up his cassock, but he's dealing with Satan down there, in a very real way. Not in a he can see it through the way the girls act out and the anger and the. So it is grueling work, but he would have it no other way. I think you said it very well. He's offered his life as a sacrifice, the definition of a priest ever since the Old Testament. We know the definition, the identity of a priest is one who offers sacrifice. He's always understood this. Now he's offering sacrifice sort of in a different dimension. So, you know what? That's so wonderful you asked for these folks to pray for him, because he does need prayer. He's a nut. We all know it. I mean, I don't know if you know Father Dan. He's a nut. He's hilarious. He's crazy. He drives me crazy. He's just, you going to Our Lady of Fields talking tonight? Yeah. Just don't blow it. Don't blow it. I'm like, yeah, Father. Thanks for the encouragement. But he does need prayer because he doesn't have Ocean City vacation. He does not have golf outings. He does not go down to Bethany. It's 365. And he's told me, he said, Wells, if I want to try and be like this Father Al, I got to expect to be kicked in the teeth every day. And that's what happens. But that's all I got.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're going to pause right now and kind of give a 10-minute transition period. So Kevin will be in the back. And there's plenty of material back there, books and all that. We'll give kind of a 10-minute period so you can go ask questions or whatnot. Then we'll transition into a time of adoration, and I'll be available for confession. So please feel free to stay however long you'd like. And thanks again, Kevin. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you.